Thank you for joining me. The anti-Israel, anti-Jewish movement is growing in its power and its force on American college campuses today and other locations. And the movement emanates from the left. It's not the old traditional anti-Semites on the right, who are still out there, as I recently found out when I interviewed Richard Spencer. And it's not even necessarily Islamists who obviously are anti-Israel, but it's emerged between Islamist positions on Israel, particularly Palestinian positions, and the American left, and they're bringing in students, including Jewish students, into their cause. And I want to give a little history of this briefly. First of all, and I want to talk about what we can do about it. It was in around 1971, 1972, that shortly after the forming of the Palestinian PLO, that Abu Iyad, one of the major Palestinian activists at the time and a terrorist, he and a delegation of his fellow Palestinians went to Hanoi. This was at the height of the Vietnam War, to talk to communist North Vietnamese leaders about how it is that they had garnered such international support among the left, college students and others, and that they had been able to launch these protests in Paris and in American campuses, and they were able to curry such favor with left establishment and people like in the media at high levels, in a tacit sense, people like Walter Cronkite. I'm not saying he was outright pro North Vietnam, but generally speaking, classic propagandist in that the coverage would tend to favor a North Vietnamese position, and that they had made such inroads into the establishment, all under the guise of anti-war. How did they do this? Abu Iyad and his fellow Palestinian PLO members asked the North Vietnamese. And the North Vietnamese said, first of all, you have to tone down your language, which is not winning you any friends. I mean, back then they were like, we're going to wipe out Israel, drive them into the sea, destroy Israel. Every Jew will be removed from the country unless you could prove that you were born from a family that was there before 1881 or whenever the day was. And that's not winning the popularity contest. Instead, you have to use language like liberation. You have to wrap yourselves in a moralistic flag that the left responds to, that somehow you're the underdog. And you have to talk about, rights, and that somehow you have a right to do this. And that on a tactical level, you need to pose as accepting of Israel's position in exchange for getting a piece of the country. And, then later on, you could go in and take the whole hog when the timing is right. They call that the quote unquote two-state solution. And Abu Iyad took this to heart. I mean, it was shortly after that Yasser Arafat showed up at the UN with a gun strapped to his holster. And he gave a speech about, the virtues of liberation. And they launched this campaign called Zionism is Racism, which lasted for several years. Eventually, it was finally stamped out, mainly by well-meaning people who said, no, Zionism has nothing to do with racism. It's simply the national movement of the state of Israel, just like patriotism is the national movement of America. Well, today, the same type of language and the same type of tactics are being used to try to delegitimize Israel on the surface through boycotting Israeli businesses and asking companies, and particularly college campuses, to not invest in the state of Israel and to sanction Israel. But it's more fundamental than that. It's really an attempt to delegitimize the existence of the state of Israel, with the ultimate goal being to go in ultimately for the whole hog and wipe the place out. And they have made inroads among campus students by appealing to left-wing kind of language, this virtuous language of somehow that we are the good people, we're the beautiful people, that the other people are oppressive, and that we are somehow victimized. And they've made inroads. They have an organization called Students for Justice in Palestine. But more insidiously, they've got a Jewish group that is basically, it's called so-called Jewish. It's called Jewish Voices for Peace, a left-wing group that, engages in, that's made up, in my opinion, of quislings, people who are essentially supporting a genocidal agenda against the Jewish people and the state of Israel, and yet not necessarily consciously, and I don't think they are conscious. They're unwitting. They're fellow traveling with an agenda that seeks to do just that. And they are attracting young Jewish thinkers, and they're poisoning their minds. Now, it's more than just setting up these phony these groups as Jewish Voice of Peace, and I'd love to see who's behind that financially. I wonder if it might be George Soros. He seems to have his fingers on a lot of these things, including the judge in the Southern District of New York, Kimber Wood, who presided over his wedding recently, and who's now authorizing the looting of President Trump's lawyer, the law firm. They're ransacking his office and breaking his door down. She sounds like a communist country, but putting that aside, they have made inroads among liberal Jewish students who are not well connected to their Jewish faith, frankly, who don't really believe in God, not to be judgmental here, and I don't know that, but they're not religious people. They don't have much moral underpinning. They haven't been given the basic moral structures growing up like a lot of secular people. And so they're vulnerable to this kind of highly moralistic siren sound coming out of this group. And they're aggressive. They're trying to take over Hillel, which is a pro-Israel Jewish group on college campuses, has long been, by saying that somehow Hillel is wrong for not including their anti-Israel views, and so they have to have equal time at Hillel. What I would suggest to people who are supporters of Hillel is, number one, tell them that if they're going to have equal time at Hillel, then Hillel has to have equal time at Jewish Voice for Peace. So their anti-Israel position has to be matched 50-50. After all, we want to be inclusive and fair. But more fundamentally, call it for what it is. These are Jews who are supporting a genocidal agenda against the Jewish people and against the state of Israel. So if they're going to get on their high horse and start talking about oppression, and they're going to think that they're taking some kind of a moral position, they'd better think twice. Now, if they're going to say, well, most Palestinian Arabs don't support that, fine, they're probably right. Most Germans didn't support the Holocaust either during World War II in Germany, in Nazi Germany. Most Russians didn't support Soviet communism, which was responsible for the murders of 50 million people. It's not a matter of who is supporting it. It's a matter of the fact that this is a virulent, hateful, radical ideology that has taken hold in the Palestinian community, and that until they can get their own house in order, there really can't be a discussion about two states. Now, if they do get their house in order, and this was an appeal to the Jewish Voices for Peace people and those who support them, then fine, maybe they could then have such a discussion. They have to stop the Jew hatred in their school books, where they're teaching children to hate Jews. They have to stop firing missiles from their sovereign territory in Gaza and building terror tunnels so they can get into the state of Israel itself for the purpose of murdering as many Jews as they can. They want to take the wall down, fine. Let them stop sending suicide bombers who are blowing themselves up and pizza parlors and discotheques for the purpose of trying to kill as many Jews as possible. In other words, if they want to talk about a two-state solution as a start, they have to put their own house in order. They're not being oppressed. That's a bunch of bullcrap. I mean, the state of Israel handed them on a silver platter the Gaza Strip under Ariel Sharon. They stripped away the Jewish population in that region. They made it Judenrein. They ethnically cleansed it. They turned over businesses and greenhouses and little factories to the new Palestinian Authority. They gave them money that poured in from all over the world, actually. They helped train their police force. They helped try to set up their administration, help them develop a government structure, promised to give them more. They gave them at that time also portions of Judea and Samaria, particularly around Jericho. The Palestinian Arabs had every opportunity to develop a sovereign state there. And this is not some poor piece of land either. The Gaza is beachfront property that could have been turned into, the Hong Kong or Singapore if they had played their cards right. And Israel had completely stepped aside and was willing to not only observe it, but help them. But instead, they turned it into a terror center and a launch pad for war against the state of Israel itself. So that included, thousands of missiles firing into Israel and terror tunnels. So ask yourself, or ask these Jewish Voice for Peace Jews, exactly who is engaging in aggression. Where is the good faith in terms of creating a Palestinian state? And if they really want to try to affect a Palestinian state, they've got to help Palestinians get their house in order, get their demonstrate that they're capable in good faith of conducting the administration of a peaceful state that can live alongside the state of Israel and have a normal relationship with Israel, not constantly firing missiles. So that would be my response to these left-wingers over at the Jewish Voice for Peace. But of course, their complaint against Israel is more fundamental than that. It's not the Palestinians are just an excuse. It's just cannon fodder in their bigger agenda, quite frankly. And that is that they despise Israel, really, in a way, for the same reason that they despise the United States. There are two things about Israel that they particularly loathe. The first one is that Israel is a capitalist society. It's a free market society, not completely. I mean, they have socialistic aspects, and they certainly used to be more socialistic. They've become more capitalist under Netanyahu, which of course makes him a villain, even for many Israelis. But the fact of the matter is that Israel, even in its most socialistic stage, has always respected the free market, has always respected private ownership, individual initiative, the development of the sovereign individual, the character of the individual who is in maximum degree of control of their own life and their own destiny. In other words, a capitalist system, both economically and otherwise, and socially. And of course, the left despises that because it runs against this demented communist idea of creating a one world order ant colony where everybody is the same and everyone is de facto equal, and we all are like bees in a hive. The second thing they despise about Israel is that it is a Jewish state. It is a religious state, regardless of whether or not Israelis as individuals happen to be religious, regardless of whether Israelis happen to be Jewish. And a pretty good percentage of Israelis are not Jewish, by the way. They're Muslim and they're Christian, and there's about 20% of Israel is Israeli Arab, not to mention Palestinians themselves. But the fact is that at the end of the day, Israel is a Jewish state. That is the mission of Israel. Sovereignty for the Jewish people in their ancient homeland. A return to their ancient land that they had been banished from by the Romans, and the development of a Jewish society. And they've done that. I mean, it's an amazing place. It's a vibrant, organic society based on democratic principles where people of all backgrounds, people of all faiths have a very high degree of freedom, certainly comparable to any of the other states in the region, which of course threatens the old Arab oligarchy, but that's another subject. Israel is by nature, as a Jewish state, it is a state that has and fosters belief in God, belief in the creator of the universe, blessed be he. And that is a concept that the left despises. Karl Marx railed about this in his anti-Semitic screed on the Jewish question. The belief in a creator, or what Marx called the opiate of the masses, means that the individual is answerable to God, is answerable to heaven, is answerable to the divine, is answerable to the supernatural, and not to the state, not to, so-called enlightened people who control everything, which is the communist idea, which is the idea that they embrace. So a belief in God, a belief that the individual, both men and women, by the way, according to the Torah, are created in the image of God and thus are unique, and that every life is important and valuable and that deserves basic respect and rights, and that the individual as such has free will and is sovereign and can have a high degree of control of their own destiny under God, who offers immutable laws that are outside the manipulation of people. These concepts are despised by the left because they stand in the way of their agenda. And by the way, these are the very same concepts that form the foundation of the United States of America and of Christianity, which also is both hated by the left. So that's why you have Jew haters on campus, because you've got left-wing young people who are dismoored of basic understandings of objective morality or even objective existence, who have bought a bill of goods about somehow creating an equal world, which is a false paradigm because we're not equal as individuals, we're free, and thus we're unequal. We have equal rights under the law, but we're not de facto equal, never will be. But they've bought this bill of goods and they have been infiltrated by the Islamic world, which is bent on destroying Israel, members of the Islamic world, and who learned how to do it by use of left-wing language, left-wing Kant, left-wing culture, going back to that meeting in North Vietnam back in the early 1970s. And they are making inroads on college campuses today, and they are trying to, and they in fact are driving out pro-Israel, pro-Jewish, pro-American students. Now, the best way to confront them is simply by telling the truth. Don't be cowed by their high moralism and think that they're too delicate to hear the truth. They are de facto supporting a genocidal program against Israel, a genocidal program against the Jewish people. And if they want to engage in so-called social justice, they need to get with the Palestinian movement and ask them to reform their ways, and then maybe there can be talk of peace. I hope there is, but until then, there can't be. Anyway, I want to thank you for watching, everyone. Chuck Morse. The usual time is 12 noon, Monday through Friday. Have a good day, everyone.